At Providence General Hospital, the sterile white corridors and the low hum of medical machinery formed a backdrop to countless stories of hope and healing. For decades, this venerable institution had been a pillar of the community, a place where families found comfort in times of crisis and where dedicated staff strove to save lives. Yet on one rain-soaked evening, beneath the flicker of fluorescent lights and amid the muted sounds of distant beeping monitors, an event unfolded that would shatter the hospital's carefully maintained facade and expose a labyrinth of secrets hidden behind closed doors. Clara Hinton, a compassionate registered nurse known for her gentle smile and unwavering commitment to her patients, had spent the better part of her 32 years at Providence General. Her colleagues admired her for the extra time she always took with every patient, the careful notes she made during shifts, and the quiet determination with which she approached every challenge. But in the weeks leading up to that fateful night, there were murmurs among the staff that Clara had grown increasingly preoccupied. She had begun to ask unusual questions about patient records and equipment orders, and her once bright eyes now sometimes carried a glint of concern. Few realized that behind her warm bedside manner, Clara had embarked on a personal investigation, one that would soon place her in the crosshairs of powerful interests. That rain-drenched night, as the hospital's evening shift was winding down, a janitor named Jerome Alvarez was making his customary rounds in the basement corridors of the surgical wing. The corridors, usually deserted, except for the soft echoes of his footsteps, held a silence that felt too heavy, too deliberate. As Jerome passed a supply closet that had been left unlocked, a rare oversight in a building where every door was supposed to be secure, he paused. There, in a corner bathed in the dim glow of a malfunctioning light, lay the body of Clara Hinton. Clara's form was slumped against the cold metal of a storage cabinet. Her usually vibrant face was frozen in an expression of shock and quiet resignation, her eyes staring unseeing at the ceiling tiles above. A thin trail of dried blood traced a path from her temple to a crumpled scrap of paper clutched tightly in her hand. The hastily scrawled message read, "Some truths are best left hidden." For a moment Jerome stood there, heart pounding, before his training took over and he called for assistance. Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived, their voices calm but their eyes betraying the gravity of the scene. Detective Harper Williams, a seasoned investigator whose reputation for thoroughness was well established, took charge of the emerging case. Standing at the threshold of the storage closet, she surveyed the area with a critical gaze. The scene was unnervingly pristine. There were no signs of a violent struggle, no scattered personal belongings, only the deliberate positioning of Clara's body and the cryptic note that hinted at a premeditated act. Every detail, from the angle of her outstretched hand to the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with iron, seemed designed to send a message. Over the following hours, Detective Williams began her methodical investigation. She interviewed hospital staff from every shift, starting with the janitor who had discovered the body. Jerome described how he had noticed the unlocked door and the unusual quiet that seemed to pervade the corridor. "I'd been working here for years, and nothing like this ever happened," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I just did what I was trained to do." His testimony, though simple, confirmed that the scene had been discovered in a part of the hospital that normally exuded routine order and safety. Nurses and doctors were visibly shaken by the news. Many remembered Clara not only for her clinical skill but also for her empathetic nature. Evelyn Parker, a senior nurse who had worked alongside Clara for nearly a decade, recalled, "Clara was the kind of person who would sit with a patient until they fell asleep from comfort. Lately, though, I noticed she was distracted, often poring over documents during her breaks, as if she was trying to uncover something that didn't belong." Her words hinted at a hidden side of Clara that no one had expected, a quiet determination to question the status quo, even at the risk of personal safety. Detective Williams obtained a search warrant for Clara's small apartment, a modest space filled with well-worn books, family photographs, and mementos of a life devoted to caregiving. In a cluttered corner of her living room, behind a row of dog-eared classics, investigators discovered a leather-bound journal. Its pages, meticulously handwritten in neat script, chronicled Clara's observations over the past several months. Early entries recounted the daily cadence of the hospital, the rhythms of patient rounds, the minutiae of shift handovers, and the small victories of recovery. But as the pages turned, a more troubling narrative emerged. Clara had begun documenting anomalies in the hospital's patient records and supply orders. She noted, for instance, that certain critical medications and surgical supplies were consistently missing from inventory logs. In one entry, dated just 10 days before her death, she wrote, "I've noticed discrepancies in the orders for our life-saving drugs. The numbers aren't adding up. I fear someone is diverting supplies, and if this continues, it may cost lives." The urgency in her words was palpable, a desperate cry for answers in the face of a mystery that seemed to be swallowing the very heart of the hospital. Digital forensics experts later recovered fragments of deleted emails from Clara's work computer. Among these were messages exchanged with an unknown individual who signed off as Mercury. One recovered email warned, "Cease your inquiry, or the consequences will be severe." Though the identity of Mercury remained cloaked in layers of encryption and anonymity, the tone was unmistakably threatening, and it confirmed that Clara's investigations had not gone unnoticed by those who benefited from keeping the truth concealed. As Detective Williams pieced together the evidence, she began to suspect that Clara's investigation had targeted more than just missing supplies. Internal audit reports from Providence General Hospital, publicly lauded for its commitment to patient care, revealed irregularities in the ordering of critical items such as surgical instruments and antibiotics. Although hospital administrators had attributed these discrepancies to clerical errors and the chaos of managing a large facility, the detailed records from Clara's journal suggested a deliberate pattern. Over time, small amounts of high-value supplies had disappeared from the inventory, and the losses had been discreetly adjusted out of the official records. Forensic accountants, brought in to examine the data, confirmed that the pattern was too consistent to be dismissed as mere error. It pointed to a systematic diversion of resources. Determined to uncover the truth, Detective Williams expanded her investigation to include interviews with key hospital personnel. She met with Dr. Robert Klein, a well-respected surgeon whose precise technique and compassionate bedside manner had earned him accolades. Dr. Klein admitted that he had noticed subtle delays in the delivery of essential supplies over the past few months, but he had assumed it was a temporary issue. "We're a busy hospital," he explained, "and sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. I didn't think much of it until more and more items started disappearing." His candid admission, combined with the mounting evidence, suggested that the problem was more than an administrative hiccup. It was an intentional cover-up, designed to redirect resources for unknown purposes. Another figure emerged during the investigation, a hospital administrator named Karen Litt, a quiet but shrewd manager known for her efficiency and discretion. When questioned about the inventory irregularities, Karen explained that recent budget cuts had forced the hospital to tighten its operations, and that minor discrepancies were sometimes overlooked as part of routine cost-saving measures. But her tone changed when pressed about the specific shortages in surgical supplies and medications. There were instances where items simply weren't ordered at all, she admitted reluctantly. "I'm not saying it was deliberate, but there were pressures to maintain budget targets that made us overlook certain anomalies." Her response, while ambiguous, only deepened Detective Williams' suspicion that the diversion of supplies was being orchestrated to serve a hidden agenda. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a former nurse, Jessica Morales, no relation to Detective Williams, came forward with a startling revelation. Jessica had worked in the hospital's intensive care unit and recalled that several months earlier, Clara had confided in her about a series of unusual occurrences. Clara said that she'd seen things, small details that didn't add up, Jessica recalled softly. She mentioned overhearing conversations about reassigning orders and that some high-level meetings were taking place away from the public eye. "I thought she was just overworked, but now I'm convinced she was onto something far bigger." Jessica's testimony provided a crucial link between Clara's personal investigation and the broader network of irregularities within the hospital. Meanwhile, digital experts continued to sift through the recovered data, gradually reconstructing the timeline of Clara's inquiries. They discovered that her deleted emails with Mercury had been exchanged over several weeks, with each message growing increasingly urgent. One email, partially restored from a corrupted backup, read, "If you continue, you will face the consequences. This is not a game." The repeated warnings indicated that someone in a position of influence was actively working to suppress any further inquiry into the missing supplies. The anonymity of Mercury was both a protective shield and a tool of intimidation, ensuring that those who dared to challenge the established order did so at great personal risk. As Detective Williams began to connect the dots, she realized that the diversion of supplies was likely tied to a clandestine operation. The forensic accountant's report had revealed that the funds earmarked for purchasing critical medical equipment were being funneled to an external entity, a small shell organization registered in a neighboring state. The sums involved, while modest on a monthly basis, accumulated to a significant figure over time. It appeared that a group within the hospital's management had been siphoning off resources, possibly to sell them on the black market or to finance unauthorized experiments. The notion that patient care might have been compromised by such a scheme sent a shudder through the investigative team. In one of the most significant breakthroughs, Detective Williams secured a search warrant for the office of a recently dismissed purchasing manager named Andrew Cole. Andrew, whose abrupt termination had been quietly noted by several colleagues, was known to have been responsible for overseeing supply orders. In his cluttered office, hidden behind stacks of order forms and vendor contracts, investigators uncovered a series of internal memos that detailed adjustments to the supply orders. One memo, dated just 2 weeks before Clara's death, included a directive to reduce orders by a minimal percentage to maintain budget targets, ensuring that any discrepancies are absorbed by the system. The language was clinical yet chilling, an instruction that left little room for ambiguity. The memo also contained an encrypted note that, when decrypted, warned that any investigation into these adjustments would be met with unavoidable repercussions. This evidence confirmed that the irregularities were not accidental but part of an organized scheme. As the case built toward a climax, Detective Williams compiled all her findings into an extensive report that detailed every facet of the investigation, from the discovery of Clara's body and the recovered personal journal to the digital trails and internal memos that revealed a network of collusion. Federal agents were eventually brought in to assist with further financial and digital forensics, and a joint task force was established to pursue leads that extended beyond the hospital. Their combined efforts revealed that the external entity receiving the diverted funds was linked to a notorious dealer in medical equipment, someone who had built a reputation for acquiring surplus supplies from distressed institutions and reselling them at a premium on the underground market. In a decisive operation, law enforcement executed a series of coordinated raids at storage facilities, vendor offices, and even online marketplaces known to traffic in stolen goods. Among the recovered items were batches of high-end medical devices and surgical instruments, along with digital records that traced their origin back to Providence General. The physical evidence was a damning corroboration of the internal documents, and it lent a final, irrefutable weight to the case against the conspirators. The trial that followed was a protracted legal battle, drawing intense media coverage and a deep emotional response from the community. In a packed courtroom where concerned citizens, hospital staff, and patient families gathered with bated breath, federal prosecutors presented their case with painstaking precision. Expert witnesses, including forensic accountants and digital analysts, demonstrated how the seemingly minor discrepancies in supply orders, when aggregated over time, amounted to a deliberate, systematic theft of critical resources. The testimony was interspersed with poignant recollections from former employees, who spoke of a workplace where questions were met with silence and dissent was quietly punished. Detective Williams took the stand, her testimony measured and resolute as she recounted the grim details of the investigation. She described the haunting discovery of Clara's body in the storage room, the painstaking reconstruction of her final hours through recovered emails and journal entries, and the internal memos that revealed a cover-up so thorough that it spanned multiple layers of management. Her words were laced with both professional rigor and personal sorrow, reflecting the profound loss of a dedicated nurse whose only crime was her pursuit of truth. The courtroom was silent as she detailed the redacted directives, the encrypted warnings from Mercury, and the ledger of supply adjustments that had become the smoking gun in the case. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the trial did not yield a neat, unambiguous victory. Several mid-level managers and the dismissed purchasing supervisor were convicted on charges ranging from fraud and conspiracy to accessory to homicide, receiving lengthy prison sentences. Yet many of the highest-ranking figures involved in the cover-up managed to evade the harshest penalties through legal technicalities and corporate protections. Their names remained obscured behind layers of redacted documents, leaving the community with a lingering sense of injustice and unanswered questions. While the indictments had confirmed that the diversion of supplies was a deliberate, coordinated effort, the full extent of the conspiracy and the true identity of those orchestrating it from behind the scenes remained partially shrouded in mystery. In the aftermath of the trial, Providence General Hospital embarked on a sweeping campaign of reform. New protocols were introduced to ensure rigorous oversight of supply orders, and independent audits became a permanent fixture in the hospital's administrative practices. Patient advocacy groups and community leaders rallied to demand transparency and accountability, organizing town hall meetings and public forums to discuss the implications of the case. The story of Clara Hinton, a dedicated nurse who had sacrificed everything in the name of truth, resonated deeply with the community, sparking a renewed commitment to safeguarding the integrity of public institutions. Detective Williams continued her work, undaunted by the unresolved threads of the case. In quiet moments, as she reviewed the recovered files in her modest office, she would reflect on the poignant words in Clara's journal, the detailed observations, the cryptic warnings, and the final desperate call to action. The memory of Clara's determined spirit, her quiet courage in the face of mounting danger, remained a constant source of inspiration. Though the case had delivered significant reforms and brought several perpetrators to justice, it also underscored the ongoing struggle against systems that valued profit and convenience over human life. Over time, the case evolved into a symbol of accountability within the community. Local colleges introduced courses on ethics in public administration, using the Providence General investigation as a case study. Investigative journalists continued to probe the broader network of illicit trade in medical supplies, uncovering similar patterns in other institutions and building on the evidence uncovered by the task force. Community art projects and memorials celebrated the legacy of those who had fought to expose hidden wrongs, ensuring that Clara's story was remembered as a beacon of integrity and perseverance. In a reflective moment years later, Detective Williams walked through the quiet, sunlit halls of Providence General, now transformed by new leadership and robust safety measures. The hospital's walls, once a silent witness to corruption, now echoed with the promise of renewal and transparency. As she passed by the memorial plaque dedicated to Clara Hinton, a simple inscription reading, "In every act of care truth endures," she felt a surge of bittersweet satisfaction. The battle for accountability was far from over, but each small victory was a step toward a future where the pursuit of truth was honored and protected. Though many in the community celebrated the tangible reforms that had emerged from the trial, there remained a palpable undercurrent of unease. Whispers persisted of unresolved questions: the identity of the shadowy figure seen on the surveillance footage, the origin of the encrypted warnings from Mercury, and the possibility that similar schemes might still be operating in other institutions. For Detective Williams, these lingering mysteries were a solemn reminder that the quest for justice is an endless journey, one that demands vigilance, courage, and an unyielding commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it is hidden. As seasons turned and the gentle rhythm of hospital life resumed, the story of Clara Hinton and the conspiracy that claimed her life became a permanent part of local lore, a narrative that was recounted in hushed tones at community meetings, discussed in academic forums, and memorialized in independent documentaries. It was a story that transcended the confines of a single institution, evolving into a broader movement for transparency and ethical accountability in healthcare. The case underscored that every detail, every record, and every whisper of corruption mattered, and that the sacrifices of those who dared to speak out could ignite change that resonated far beyond their immediate surroundings. In the end, the legacy of Providence General's dark chapter was not measured solely by the legal outcomes or the reform mandates that followed, but by the enduring spirit of those who refused to accept silence in the face of wrongdoing. Detective Williams, with each new case, carried with her the lessons learned from Clara's investigation, the belief that the smallest anomaly can open a window into a much larger truth, and that the light of inquiry must never be dimmed by fear or intimidation. There were no perfect endings in that long, winding saga, only a continuous struggle between those who profit from secrecy and those who champion the cause of openness and justice. As the hospital continued to serve its community with renewed transparency, and as public forums and academic discussions kept the conversation alive, the story of Clara Hinton remained a poignant testament to the power of one voice in the relentless pursuit of truth. In a world where systems of care can sometimes be subverted by hidden agendas, the case served as a clarion call that every act of neglect, every misdirected order, and every attempt to bury the truth carries a heavy price. And though the shadows of that fateful investigation still lingered in some corners, they also inspired a new generation of whistleblowers, investigators, and advocates dedicated to ensuring that the safety and integrity of our institutions are never compromised for the sake of convenience or profit. As dawn broke over Providence General Hospital each morning, casting long shadows along its freshly painted corridors and illuminating the faces of devoted staff, the memory of Clara Hinton's courage continued to shine as a quiet beacon of hope. Her legacy was not one of despair, but of an unyielding commitment to truth, a reminder that in the ceaseless quest for justice, even the most elusive secrets eventually yield to the light of determined inquiry. Detective Harper Williams, now a veteran of many battles in the name of accountability, kept that promise alive with every new investigation. Each case, each hidden record, each whispered threat was a call to keep searching, to keep questioning, and to hold fast to the conviction that truth, however well concealed, will one day prevail. And in that pursuit, even the smallest revelation becomes a victory, a testament to the enduring power of integrity and the unbreakable spirit of those who dare to expose the dark corners of our world. In the rustic mountain town of Cedar Ridge, the Crestwood Lodge had long been a cherished retreat, a historic inn that combined vintage charm with modern hospitality. Visitors arrived from near and far to experience its creaking wooden floors, antique chandeliers, and the quiet promise of refuge in a place steeped in local lore. For decades, the lodge had witnessed celebrations and heartbreaks, whispered secrets and friendly reunions. But on one fateful autumn weekend, amid the swirling mists and cool mountain air, a series of events would expose buried truths and forever alter the town's collective memory. Nathaniel Burke, a dedicated local educator and freelance historian with a quiet passion for unearthing hidden stories, had spent years researching the inn's mysterious past. His interests had led him to comb through dusty town records, old photographs, and forgotten newspaper clippings stored in the Cedar Ridge archives. Nathaniel had become particularly obsessed with a dark chapter in the lodge's history, one involving a string of unexplained disappearances from the 1970s that had been quietly swept under the rug by local authorities. Convinced that the official narrative was a carefully constructed facade, he meticulously recorded every anomaly in a battered journal, his handwriting growing more urgent as he connected the dots between long-forgotten incidents and the current state of affairs. That chilly Friday evening, as the Crestwood Lodge prepared to host a weekend conference for local historians and community leaders, Nathaniel arrived early to review his notes in the lobby. The inn's grand foyer, with its polished marble floors and richly carved wooden banisters, usually exuded an air of dignified calm. But on that evening, a subtle tension lurked behind the smiles of the staff. Nathaniel's presence, his determined glances toward the old portrait gallery, and his furtive inquiries with long-time employees, had not gone unnoticed. He had been asking too many questions about the lodge's restricted archives and the history of the property's ownership. His recent conversations with an anonymous source, delivered via encrypted messages on his phone, hinted at revelations that would shake the very foundation of Cedar Ridge. After the conference began, Nathaniel disappeared. At first, his absence was attributed to a last-minute scheduling change. But when the morning sun revealed that he had not returned to his room, whispers of concern began to circulate. It wasn't until a maintenance worker found his body in the dim corridor near the old servants' quarters, an area rarely used since renovations, that the full horror became apparent. There on the faded patterned carpet lay Nathaniel Burke, slumped against a paneled wall. His eyes were fixed in a final vacant stare, and a single scrap of paper was clutched tightly in his hand. The note, scrawled in hurried letters, read, "Some truths must remain unchallenged." The discovery sent shockwaves through the small community. Within hours, local law enforcement swarmed the Crestwood Lodge. Uniformed officers taped off the corridor, and forensic teams carefully documented every detail. The precise angle of Nathaniel's outstretched hand, the delicate smear of dried blood on the carpet, and the faded note that now stood as a grim testament to his final moments. Detective Caroline Ward, known for her unyielding resolve and perceptiveness honed by years of investigating cold cases, was assigned to the scene. Arriving in the early morning hush, she immediately sensed that Nathaniel's death was not a random tragedy, but a calculated act intended to silence a voice that threatened to expose long-buried secrets. Over the next several days, Detective Ward conducted a series of interviews with staff and residents of Cedar Ridge. She learned that Nathaniel had been an unassuming yet determined man who had dedicated himself to uncovering the true history of the Crestwood Lodge. Maria Delgado, a longtime concierge at the inn, recalled how Nathaniel had once confided, "I'm on the trail of something big, something that's been hidden for far too long. The records don't add up, and the past, it's like a puzzle waiting to be solved." Maria's recollections, tinged with admiration and sorrow, painted a picture of a man whose passion for truth had set him on a collision course with forces determined to keep the past shrouded in silence. At the heart of the investigation was Nathaniel's journal, a thick leather-bound notebook whose pages documented months of painstaking research. Early entries were filled with routine observations, notes on local legends, sketches of historic buildings, and carefully recorded dates of significant events. But as the pages progressed, his tone shifted noticeably. He began to detail inconsistencies in property deeds and anomalies in town records. One particularly frenzied entry read, "I've cross-checked the old sale records with the current deeds. There's a discrepancy, multiple properties transferred at suspiciously low prices. It's as if someone has been erasing certain names from history." The entry ended with a scrawled warning, "I must proceed with caution. Forces are at work that do not wish for these truths to emerge." Each page reinforced the notion that Nathaniel had been on the verge of exposing a hidden conspiracy, one that implicated a powerful local family whose influence extended over much of Cedar Ridge. The family in question was the Thorns, a lineage that had for generations played a pivotal role in shaping the town's fortunes. Publicly celebrated as benefactors, the Thorns were also the subject of hushed rumors and unspoken fears. According to some older residents, the family had a long history of discreetly acquiring land and wealth through means that were never fully disclosed. Nathaniel's research had uncovered evidence that several properties, including parts of the Crestwood Lodge itself, had been transferred to the Thorns under murky circumstances. A series of old photographs, newspaper clippings, and faded legal documents hinted at a pattern of transactions that had benefited the family disproportionately. In his journal, Nathaniel had written, "The Thorns have rewritten our town's history with ink that conceals as much as it reveals. I fear the truth will shatter their carefully constructed narrative." His words resonated deeply with Detective Ward, who now saw his murder as an attempt to stop the unraveling of a long-standing cover-up. Digital forensics experts were able to recover fragments of deleted emails from Nathaniel's laptop, a machine he had used during his many nights spent combing through the town's archives. Among these recovered messages were terse exchanges with an anonymous correspondent identified only as Mercury. One email warned, "Cease your inquiry or face the consequences." The language was devoid of any personal tone, yet it carried an unmistakable threat. The digital evidence strongly suggested that powerful individuals had been monitoring Nathaniel's progress and were prepared to take drastic measures to prevent further exposure. Detective Ward expanded her investigation to include interviews with local historians, archivists, and even former employees of the Thorns' various enterprises. Dr. Evelyn Marks, a curator at the Cedar Ridge Historical Society, recalled that records from the early 20th century often bore signs of tampering. Altered figures, redacted names, and annotations that contradicted official narratives. There have always been whispers, Dr. Marks confided, that some chapters of our history were edited to favor the elite. What Nathaniel was looking into was a thread that runs through many of our public records. Her testimony bolstered the growing theory that Nathaniel's murder was linked to an ongoing effort to suppress inconvenient truths about the town's past. Simultaneously, Detective Ward conducted a thorough review of the archival records at the county clerk's office. There, amidst brittle documents and fading ink, she discovered discrepancies that aligned with Nathaniel's notes. In several property deeds, names of previous owners had been altered, and sale prices were reported far below market value, details that suggested coercion and secret deals. One faded document, its edges tattered by time, detailed a property transfer in which the buyer's name was replaced by a cryptic abbreviation, leaving out crucial details. The document, when compared with Nathaniel's journal, confirmed that he had been on the right track. The evidence was building, piece by piece, to form a picture of a cover-up that had spanned decades. Despite the mounting evidence, there were still many unanswered questions. Who was the anonymous correspondent known as Mercury? And what role did they play in the larger conspiracy? Why had the Thorns, despite their public persona of philanthropy, been so intent on concealing certain aspects of the town's history? And perhaps most disturbingly, was Nathaniel's murder the final act of a decades-long effort to rewrite history, or was it merely one chapter in a much larger narrative of corruption and repression? As the investigation progressed, Detective Ward's team uncovered additional clues in the form of a series of encrypted text messages sent to Nathaniel's cell phone in the weeks before his death. The messages, once decoded, contained warnings to keep silent and forget what you've found. Their cold, impersonal tone was a stark reminder that the forces behind the cover-up were both organized and ruthless. Each new message deepened the mystery, reinforcing the belief that those with power would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. One breakthrough came when a retired local journalist, Martin Reese, who had once covered the unsolved murder of Councilman Richard Ellis decades ago, approached Detective Ward with information. Martin had long harbored suspicions about the Thorns' involvement in historical cover-ups, and he recalled a series of secret meetings held in the 1970s between high-ranking town officials and members of the family. There was always an air of mystery around the Thorns, Martin said, his voice thick with nostalgia and regret. I remember hearing that they had powerful allies, people who could change records and make problems disappear. Nathaniel's work was threatening to expose something that had been kept hidden for far too long. His testimony provided a link between the old cold case of Councilman Ellis and the current investigation, suggesting that the same shadowy network might have been at work across different eras. Federal agents, recognizing the potential national significance of the case, were eventually brought in to assist with further forensic analysis and digital recovery. Their advanced techniques allowed them to reconstruct a more complete timeline of the deleted emails and text messages from Nathaniel's devices. The recovered data revealed that the exchanges with Mercury had intensified in the final weeks of his investigation. One particularly damning message warned, "Your discovery will unearth more than you can handle." Although the identity behind the alias remained obscured, the language used hinted at a deep-seated institutional effort to suppress any challenge to the established narrative. Armed with this extensive body of evidence, Detective Ward and her team compiled a comprehensive report that detailed every element of the investigation. The dossier, a thick file of handwritten notes, digital records, and transcribed interviews, was presented to the district attorney in a series of private briefings. In those sessions, the full scope of the conspiracy was laid bare, a decades-long operation to rewrite the town's history, protect the reputation of a powerful family, and silence anyone who dared to question the official records. The district attorney, moved by the weight of the evidence and the emotional toll on the community, obtained search warrants for offices and storage facilities linked to the Thorns. In a coordinated raid at a once grand estate now converted into a community center, federal agents uncovered a trove of documents, old property deeds, internal memos, and even a ledger that meticulously tracked the series of dubious transfers. The ledger, its entries written in elegant, deliberate script, was a damning confirmation that the discrepancies were not mere oversights, but a systematic cover-up. Each entry was annotated with dates and initials, providing a timeline that corroborated Nathaniel's journal. The recovered documents left little doubt that the truth had been altered to serve the interests of those in power. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Cedar Ridge's history. In a packed courtroom filled with residents, historians, and impassioned community members, federal prosecutors presented their case with painstaking detail. Expert witnesses took the stand, digital forensic analysts who explained how the deleted messages had been recovered, forensic accountants who demonstrated the cumulative impact of the altered records, and local historians who contextualized the Abernathy Thorn legacy within the broader narrative of the town's evolution. The prosecution argued that Nathaniel Burke's relentless pursuit of truth, which led him to uncover these historical manipulations, had made him a target, and that his murder was the calculated result of an effort to preserve a corrupted narrative. Witnesses from among the town's elder residents recounted tales of injustice, a family forced to sell ancestral land at a fraction of its value, a beloved community leader quietly removed from office, and secrets that had been tucked away behind polite smiles and ceremonial gestures. Their testimonies were filled with both anger and sorrow, as they recalled how the past had been obscured by the actions of those who wielded power without accountability. One particularly moving account came from an elderly woman who had once lived on a property that was abruptly transferred to the Abernathy Thorn holding. "I lost more than a house that day," she said, her voice trembling. "I lost a piece of my family's soul. And now, I learned that my story was hidden so that others could profit from our misfortune." Detective Ward took the stand and delivered her testimony with a measured yet forceful tone. She recounted the discovery of Nathaniel's body on the boardwalk, the meticulous recovery of his journal, and the encrypted messages that warned him to stop his inquiries. Her presentation was both factual and deeply personal, a chronicle of her tireless efforts to uncover a hidden truth that spanned generations. Every detail, from the subtle discrepancies in the property records to the final desperate warnings received by Nathaniel, underscored the tragic irony that one man's quest for historical accuracy had been extinguished by a network determined to keep its secrets intact. While the trial resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and financial officers connected to the altered records, not all questions were resolved. Some of the top figures behind the cover-up managed to evade full accountability by exploiting legal loopholes and the protective aura of their long-standing legacy. Their names were redacted in public documents, and their influence, though diminished by the scandal, still lingered like a dark stain on the town's history. The unresolved nature of the anonymous messages and the shadowy figure glimpsed on surveillance footage served as a persistent reminder that despite the legal victories, the battle for complete transparency was far from over. In the wake of the trial, Cedar Ridge embarked on a period of reflection and reform. Community leaders, spurred by public outrage and the revelations brought forth by the investigation, pushed for new measures to safeguard historical records and to ensure that all property transfers and public documents were subject to independent audits. Town hall meetings became lively forums where citizens demanded accountability from those who had once operated with unchecked power. The story of Nathaniel Burke's investigation and tragic death became a symbol of the high price of silence, a rallying cry for those who believed that every piece of history deserved to be told in its entirety, no matter how painful. The Crestwood Lodge, once a beloved landmark now tarnished by its hidden past, underwent significant changes. Its management, forced to confront the legacy of manipulation and cover-ups, implemented strict protocols for archival transparency, and began hosting public lectures on local history. The once secretive dealings of the Abernathy Thorn family were slowly exposed through a combination of independent research, government inquiries, and the brave testimonies of those who had suffered at their hands. Over time, a new narrative emerged, one that honored the memory of those who had lost much in the battle for truth, and that promised a future where history would no longer be written in silence. Detective Caroline Ward, whose name became synonymous with the relentless pursuit of justice, continued to serve the community with unyielding dedication. Though the scars of the investigation remained etched in her heart, she found solace in the progress that had been made, a legacy of reform that echoed through the newly established oversight boards, the improved records keeping in town offices, and the spirited discussions among citizens about their collective past. Every day, as she walked the familiar streets of Cedar Ridge, she was reminded of the courage of one man who had dared to question the official narrative, and the enduring importance of transparency in the face of power. In quiet moments, Detective Ward would return to the boardwalk where Nathaniel Burke's lifeless body had been discovered. Under the soft glow of early morning light, as the gentle murmur of the waves mingled with the distant hum of life, she would review the recovered journal entries and digital files, a personal ritual that reaffirmed her commitment to the truth. The lingering uncertainties, the anonymous warnings, the redacted names, and the elusive figure caught on grainy surveillance, remained unresolved, a reminder that even significant victories in the legal arena can leave unanswered questions. Yet for Ward and for the community of Cedar Ridge, the battle had transformed into a broader movement, a continuous drive to ensure that no secret, however deeply buried, would ever again be allowed to dictate the future of their shared history. In the years that followed, the case became a touchstone for change. Academic conferences delved into its implications for historical integrity and the ethics of public records management. Investigative journalists built upon the evidence uncovered during the trial to expose similar cover-ups in other regions, and community leaders used the story as a rallying point for initiatives aimed at protecting the rights of citizens to access their own history. The once tarnished reputation of the Crestwood Lodge slowly evolved into a symbol of redemption, a place where the scars of the past had spurred a commitment to a more honest future. For Detective Ward, the journey was far from over. Each new case that came her way was approached with the same tireless curiosity and unwavering resolve that had defined the investigation into Nathaniel Burke's death. She understood that the struggle for truth was never truly complete, that every discrepancy in a record, every deleted message, every whispered threat, was a call to remain vigilant in a world where power and secrecy often conspired against the public good. And so, even as Cedar Ridge moved forward with renewed determination, the legacy of that fateful autumn weekend endured, a potent reminder that the pursuit of truth, though fraught with danger and loss, is the cornerstone of a society that values justice and integrity above all. As the seasons changed, and the boardwalk filled once again with the laughter of children and the steady rhythm of daily life, the story of Nathaniel Burke continued to inspire both hope and caution. In every community meeting and every academic paper, his dedication to uncovering hidden truths served as a reminder that history is not a static record, but a living narrative, one that demands to be questioned, challenged, and ultimately understood. His memory, preserved in local lore and memorial plaques, stood as a testament to the sacrifices made in the name of transparency and the enduring belief that even when powerful forces seek to rewrite the past, the light of inquiry will eventually reveal the truth. Detective Caroline Ward, with her hard-won experience and quiet determination, pressed on in her work, guided by the conviction that every uncovered secret brings society one step closer to justice. In the soft interplay of light and shadow along Cedar Ridge's winding boardwalk, and in the renewed commitment of its citizens to guard their shared history, the legacy of that fateful investigation remained an enduring beacon, a call to action for all who believe that truth, no matter how elusive, must always be pursued. Under the faded glow of neon and the constant hum of conversation, Aurora Cinemas was the beating heart of late-night entertainment, a place where film lovers gathered to escape into worlds of fantasy and thrill. The multiplex, housed in an old converted warehouse with exposed brick and a mix of modern and vintage decor, had earned a reputation for its eclectic screenings and nostalgic charm. Every weekend, a diverse crowd filled its plush seats to watch everything from classic noir to cutting-edge indie features. Yet beneath the comfortable facade of familiar faces and shared passions, an undercurrent of danger was stirring, one that would soon transform the world of cinema into a stage for secrets and loss. It began on a humid Friday night, when the final screening of an obscure cult classic was drawing to a close. Amid the hushed clatter of emptying seats and the soft murmur of people discussing the film's cryptic ending, a disturbance shattered the routine calm. In the projection booth at the back of the auditorium, usually a sanctuary of flickering film reels and quiet focus, the body of Elias Bennett was discovered slumped over the projection console. Elias, a dedicated and quietly brilliant projectionist known for his impeccable eye and deep love of film history, lay unmoving among scattered notes and a broken coffee mug. Clutched in his hand was a scrap of paper, its ink smeared by tears and what appeared to be a single streak of blood. The brief message, scrawled in hurried script, simply read, "Some reels reveal more than they show." Within moments, Aurora Cinemas transformed from a haven of art to a grim crime scene. Uniformed officers arrived, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space as they cordoned off the projection booth. Detective Brianna Mitchell, a determined investigator, whose keen intuition and relentless attention to detail had earned her a reputation for solving the toughest cases, stepped into the booth. The stark beams of her flashlight danced over the scene, the still form of Elias, the chaotic scattering of his personal notes, and the eerie silence that filled the space where the hum of the projector had once been a constant companion. Every detail seemed deliberate, the careful placement of a few scattered film canisters, the absence of signs of a desperate struggle, and the solitary note that hinted at a message meant to be understood only by those willing to look beyond the surface. Detective Mitchell immediately began gathering accounts from the few remaining staff and patrons. Lena Rodriguez, the theater manager and one of the few who worked late into the night, recalled that Elias had been unusually quiet during the screening. He kept glancing at his phone and scribbling in that little notebook of his, Lena said, her voice tight with worry. "I thought maybe he was preparing for something special, a note, a secret perhaps, but I never imagined it would end like this." Other employees remembered that Elias had arrived earlier that evening with an intensity that was uncharacteristic. He had spent extra time in the projection booth, meticulously checking every reel and calibrating the equipment. His co-workers described him as a man whose passion for film bordered on obsession, a commitment that unbeknownst to them had led him down a dangerous path. Later that night, as the multiplex emptied and the neon lights flickered in the cool night air, forensic specialists carefully combed the projection booth. They documented every detail, the angle at which Elias's body had fallen, the slight smear of blood on the console, and the torn scrap of paper that had been clutched tightly in his hand. Digital imaging of the crime scene revealed subtle traces, a faint fingerprint on a film canister, the residual scent of cigarette smoke mixed with coffee, and even a small smear of dirt that didn't match the polished surfaces of the booth. Detective Mitchell noted these details carefully in her report. To her they suggested that the act had been executed with precision, and that the message left behind was not random, but a calculated warning. The investigation soon expanded to include the personal effects of Elias Bennett. At his modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, officers discovered a collection of items that painted a portrait of a man whose life was as layered as the films he projected. Amid framed black and white photographs of classic movie stars and a shelf lined with vintage film magazines, investigators found Elias's battered spiral notebook. Its pages were filled with meticulous observations about the films he loved, but as the entries progressed, a darker narrative emerged. Elias had been documenting discrepancies not in box office numbers or ticket sales, but in the film reels themselves. He had noted that on several occasions, key frames of the movies being screened at Aurora Cinemas had been altered, subtle modifications that to the untrained eye might have been dismissed as quirks of projection. One entry, dated just days before his death, read, "I'm noticing differences in the original prints, small cuts, rearranged scenes. It's as if someone is editing history in real time. I must compare these to the master copies before it's too late." His frantic scribbles hinted at an investigation into something far more sinister than simple technical glitches. Digital forensic experts later recovered fragments of deleted messages from Elias's laptop and mobile device. Among these were brief, alarming exchanges with an unknown individual identified only as Oracle. One message, recovered in part from a corrupted file, stated, "If you continue, you'll unspool more than film, your life may follow." The terse, ominous tone of the messages added weight to the notion that Elias's pursuit of altered film prints had provoked a reaction from someone with both influence and motive. Detective Mitchell began to suspect that the modifications in the film reels were no accident. She theorized that someone might have been deliberately tampering with the projections, possibly to alter the narrative of the films or to embed hidden messages that could manipulate public perception. The investigation turned to the technical staff at Aurora Cinemas. In interviews with sound engineers and projection assistants, she learned that there had been recent complaints about irregularities during screenings, brief moments when the image on the screen would flicker, distort, or display unexpected symbols. One projection technician, under the condition of anonymity, confided that he had once noticed a strange overlay on a classic film, a series of numbers that appeared for only a few seconds, then vanished as if erased. "I thought it was just a glitch," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But now, looking back, I wonder if it was intentional, a signal, maybe." At the same time, the investigation revealed that the modifications might be connected to a shadowy group with ties to underground media. A local independent filmmaker, Rachel Nowen, known for her unconventional documentaries on urban legends, mentioned that she had heard rumors about a secretive collective that sought to rewrite history by subtly altering public narratives. According to Rachel, this group had occasionally targeted local institutions, museums, theaters, and even public transportation systems, with messages embedded in images and sounds. They believe that by controlling the narrative, they can shape reality, Rachel explained in a hushed tone. "I always thought it was just a fringe conspiracy, but now I'm not so sure." Her insights lent an unsettling dimension to the case, suggesting that the tampered film reels might be part of a broader, ideologically driven operation. Determined to piece together the puzzle, Detective Mitchell expanded her inquiry to include technical experts in film restoration and archival processing. In a lab at a nearby university, she met with Professor Daniel Kim, a specialist in film preservation. Daniel explained that even the most carefully preserved films could sometimes exhibit minor degradation over time, but the alterations observed in the reels at Aurora Cinemas were inconsistent with natural wear. "There's a pattern here, a deliberate rearrangement of frames, minor cuts that alter the narrative arc," he said, flipping through high-resolution scans of the affected reels. "If these films were tampered with, it wasn't random, it was methodical, and it had a purpose." His analysis confirmed that the modifications were engineered rather than accidental. As the investigation deepened, Detective Mitchell uncovered a series of internal records from Aurora Cinemas that hinted at a disturbing connection. In a set of encrypted files recovered from the theater's management system, she found references to a project codenamed Echo. The files contained fragments of communications between higher-level executives and technical staff, discussing the adjustment of film prints and the need to safeguard the narrative. The term echo appeared repeatedly, suggesting that it was not just a routine procedure but an organized effort. Although the files were incomplete and heavily redacted, their presence indicated that there might be a coordinated group within the organization or with external partners dedicated to manipulating the films. Further complicating the picture, surveillance footage from the projection booth revealed a fleeting shadowy figure moving near the equipment shortly before the final screening. The individual, whose features were blurred by the camera's low light, appeared to be checking something on one of the storage racks. When digital experts enhanced the footage, they noted that the figure was wearing a distinctive cap and jacket, a style that did not match any of the regular employees on duty that night. Detective Mitchell initiated a background check on all temporary staff and contractors who had been present, and one name emerged as a potential suspect: Jordan Steele, a freelance technician with a murky past and a brief stint at Aurora Cinemas a few weeks prior. Although Jordan had since been dismissed for questionable conduct, his connections to underground media circles and his familiarity with advanced projection systems made him a person of interest. When questioned, Jordan's responses were evasive, and he offered only vague denials of any involvement in routine maintenance. His alibi, corroborated by a scant number of witnesses, did little to dispel the suspicion that he might have been part of the Echo operation. As the task force gathered momentum, the investigation branched out into a labyrinth of digital and physical evidence. Federal agents joined local law enforcement to conduct a series of coordinated raids on suspected storage facilities and technical service centers. In one nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a building once used by a now-defunct film distribution company, agents discovered crates of unmarked film reels and specialized equipment that appeared to have been repurposed for adjusting prints. Among the items was a ledger, handwritten in neat, precise script, that documented several instances of alterations made to film reels at various screenings. The ledger's entries, which detailed dates, film titles, and adjustments, corresponded almost perfectly with the anomalies noted by both Professor Kim and in Marcus's recovered journal. The evidence was overwhelming. It confirmed that someone had been systematically tampering with the films shown at Aurora Cinemas, altering key moments to create a modified narrative that suited a hidden agenda. Digital forensic experts, working tirelessly to decrypt the remaining fragments of the deleted emails, eventually recovered a final chilling message from Oracle, a pseudonym used by one of the conspirators. The message read, "The projection is clear. Do not let your inquiries reflect back on you." Though the sender's identity remained concealed, the message underscored the ruthless determination of those who orchestrated the operation and the lengths they were willing to go to maintain control over the narrative. With the body of evidence mounting, Detective Mitchell compiled her findings into a comprehensive dossier that detailed every step of the investigation, from the discovery of Elias Bennett's lifeless form in the projection booth to the intricate web of digital trails, altered film reels, and cryptic internal communications that pointed to a deliberate campaign of manipulation. The dossier was presented to the district attorney in a series of closed-door briefings, and within weeks, a grand jury was convened to review the case. In tense sessions held in a modest courthouse, the grand jury examined the array of documents, witness testimonies, and forensic reports. Expert witnesses testified about the deliberate alterations in film prints and the systematic nature of the adjustments, arguing that these changes had not only distorted the public's cultural experience, but had also been used to subtly influence the interpretation of history. The jury's deliberations were lengthy and fraught with tension, as the implications of the conspiracy stretched far beyond a single murder, touching on issues of free expression, the manipulation of media, and the integrity of cultural institutions. Finally, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, directly linking the tampering operation to the death of Elias Bennett. Although several mid-level technicians and managers were named in the indictments, the highest-level conspirators, the architects of Project Echo, remained shielded behind layers of corporate redaction and anonymous communications. The indictments confirmed that the alterations to the film reels were not random glitches, but part of a calculated operation designed to maintain a controlled narrative, and that when Elias had uncovered this truth, his life was ended to preserve the status quo. The trial that ensued became a landmark case in the intersection of cultural heritage and corporate malfeasance. In a packed courtroom filled with local residents, film enthusiasts, and determined advocates for transparency, federal prosecutors presented their case with a precision that left little room for doubt. Expert witnesses took the stand, digital analysts demonstrated the reconstruction of deleted emails, forensic accountants illustrated the systematic discrepancies in the internal logs, and film preservation specialists provided side-by-side comparisons of original prints versus the altered reels. The prosecution argued that Elias Bennett's commitment to preserving the authenticity of cultural artifacts had inadvertently exposed a covert scheme that threatened not only artistic integrity but also public trust. Witnesses testified about the eerie changes observed in recent screenings, the subtle shifts in narrative, the missing frames that once conveyed critical moments in the films, and the chilling uniformity of the adjustments across different genres. One former employee, a projectionist who had worked at Aurora Cinemas for over a decade, tearfully recounted how he had once glimpsed a colleague in an unauthorized area of the projection booth, carefully altering a reel with tools that were not part of the standard equipment. "It wasn't just about saving money," he said, voice trembling. "It was about controlling what people saw, about rewriting a part of our shared history." His testimony resonated deeply with the community, many of whom had grown up cherishing the theater as a repository of genuine cinematic art. Detective Mitchell's own testimony was a study in quiet resolve. On the stand, she recounted the sequence of events that had led to the discovery of Elias Bennett's body and the painstaking process by which the evidence had been assembled. She described the meticulous details captured in the surveillance footage, the shadowy figure near the storage area, the precise timing of the internal system log entries, and the encrypted messages that had warned of dire consequences. Her voice, measured and unwavering, conveyed both the sorrow for a life lost and the determination to hold those responsible accountable. While the trial resulted in the conviction of several mid-level operatives who had directly handled the altered reels and authorized the discrepancies, the outcome left a bittersweet aftertaste. Many of the top conspirators, the elusive architects of Project Echo, evaded complete prosecution by exploiting complex legal loopholes and leveraging the protective veil of corporate power. Their names, redacted in the public record, remained a stark reminder that while justice could be achieved on one level, the highest echelons of the operation continued to lurk in the shadows, their true identities hidden from view. In the wake of the trial, Aurora Cinemas and the surrounding cultural community were forced to confront the broader implications of the case. Public debate erupted about the manipulation of media and the integrity of cultural institutions. Local advocacy groups mobilized, calling for independent oversight of film archives and stricter regulations on how digital records and projections were managed. Community leaders organized public forums where citizens and experts alike discussed the ethics of media manipulation, the importance of preserving authentic cultural experiences, and the need to hold powerful institutions accountable for protecting the truth. Over the following years, the legacy of Elias Bennett's investigation and the ensuing trial became a touchstone for reform in the arts. Independent filmmakers and digital archivists used the case as a case study in the importance of safeguarding historical records and the dangers of allowing corporate interests to influence cultural narratives. Academic conferences delved into the implications of the altered film reels, exploring how even subtle changes could reshape public memory and distort collective identity. The case was memorialized in local art installations and community projects that celebrated the courage of those who risked everything to preserve authenticity. For Detective Brianna Mitchell, whose unwavering pursuit of truth had been the backbone of the investigation, the case remained an enduring symbol of the costs and rewards of integrity. In the quiet moments after a long day's work, she would revisit the recovered files in her modest office, her eyes lingering on Elias Bennett's journal and the reconstructed emails from Oracle. Though the digital trails and ledger entries had been painstakingly pieced together to form a damning narrative, some mysteries persisted. The true identity of the figure seen in the surveillance footage, a man whose face was blurred and whose presence had been fleeting, remained unresolved, a haunting reminder that not every shadow can be fully illuminated. The anonymous warnings and redacted memos were similarly unresolved threads, a stark acknowledgement that even a landmark case leaves behind fragments that defy complete explanation. Yet Detective Mitchell's resolve never wavered. Each new case that came her way was approached with the same meticulous care, a belief that every uncovered discrepancy was a small victory in the endless fight for transparency. In every investigation, whether it involved missing objects in a storage room or the subtle tampering of cultural heritage, she carried with her the lesson that truth, however elusive, must always be pursued. Her work became a quiet crusade, not for glory or recognition, but for the simple fundamental principle that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, deserved to be exposed. As the seasons turned and the bright lights of Aurora Cinemas continued to shine on nights filled with laughter and applause, the memory of that fateful evening lingered as a solemn reminder of what was at stake. The case of Elias Bennett and Project Echo had not only exposed a systematic cover-up, but had also ignited a broader movement, a collective resolve among citizens, historians, and cultural activists to ensure that the truth could never again be rewritten for profit or power. In the community, discussions about the case were woven into the fabric of everyday conversation. In quiet cafes, at local film screenings, and during spirited debates at public forums, people recalled how one man's relentless pursuit of authenticity had sparked a movement for accountability. His legacy, though born of tragedy, had become a beacon for those who believed that preserving the integrity of our cultural heritage was a sacred duty, a duty that required courage, persistence, and a willingness to question even the most established narratives. Years later, as new films were projected on the silver screen at Aurora Cinemas and the echoes of applause mingled with the distant sounds of the city, the legacy of Elias Bennett endured. His name was honored in a small plaque near the projection booth, a simple inscription that read, "In every frame truth endures." It served as a quiet tribute to a man who had sacrificed everything to ensure that the stories of our past remained unaltered, untainted, and above all real. For Detective Brianna Mitchell, every new case was a reminder that the fight for truth was never truly over. Even as she moved on to other investigations, the lessons learned from the Aurora Cinemas case shaped her approach. Every digital trace, every whispered tip, and every minor discrepancy held the potential to reveal a deeper story. In the endless dance between light and shadow, where every unexamined detail might hide a secret, her determination to seek out the truth remained her guiding light. The investigation into Project Echo was a mosaic of courage, loss, and the unyielding quest for transparency, a testament to the power of one person's dedication to expose corruption in even the most unexpected places. It was a story that transcended the confines of a single crime, evolving into a broader dialogue about the responsibilities of those who shape our cultural narrative. While some mysteries from that night remained unsolved, the identity of the elusive figure, the full extent of the secret network, the final origin of the ominous warnings, the overall impact of the case was undeniable. It had forced a community to confront its past, to question the integrity of the institutions it held dear, and to reaffirm its commitment to a future where truth is honored above all. And so, as the lights of Aurora Cinemas continued to flicker against the night sky and the city pulsed with renewed energy, the legacy of Elias Bennett lived on in every whispered conversation about media integrity, every quiet act of vigilance by those who sought to protect cultural history, and every determined effort to ensure that no one could silence the truth, no matter how carefully it was hidden in the reels of time.